this is a dramatic increase. Can you talk us through here just how many things will be affected? You were talking about electricity a little bit in the break, but there is a daisy chain to consider here, isn't there?
Yes, I mean, aluminum, the U.S. relies on aluminum imports because the number one cost to produce aluminum is electricity. U.S. electricity cost isn't competitive with the rest of the world. So therefore, and Canada has a better cost basis, mainly because hydroelectric power up in Canada. So the cost to a customer to get aluminum into the U.S. is the price of aluminum that we see on the LME plus a delivery premium called the Midwest Premium. So you've seen in the last few weeks when the talk from tariffs had started, the Midwest Premium previously had reflected a 10% tariff. Then it moved and it's reflected a 25% premium over the last few days or over the last month or so. And now we'll see, if you watch that, we'll see how will it go up to 50%. I kind of doubt it will go that high, but I think it will go beyond 25%.
Right. Well, I'm looking at the Midwest Premium. My producer Joe in the control room can pull that up year to date. It's gone from like 20 cents to 40 cents so far, but that was only at the end of business yesterday. Right. Now we're looking at a 50% tariff. I think a lot of people were expecting 25, so that could change dramatically at the end of business today. Joe Deaux, if I'm Mary Barra, or if I'm Jim Farley now sitting in Detroit, knowing that I have to buy aluminum to build my F-150s, how's that going to look?
I think this is a shock. I am already making calls around the market trying to figure out what people are thinking. I think this one's coming as a bit of a shock. It's unclear if the President of the United States had given a heads up to either of the industries or other industries that he might be considering doubling these. Listen, the Ford CEO said at the middle of last month that the aluminum tariffs would blow a hole into the industry. I think that was also with the idea that it would stack with the Canada-Mexico tariffs that actually have not come into place. But now you've effectively,
well, they will on April 2nd, right? Because Donald Trump has been clear that he's given them a reprieve for 1 month.
Let's ignore that for a second. They were assuming, okay, if you get a stack, right, tariff stack, you had 25% on aluminum, and you were going to get 25% on Canada, which is the biggest producer that the U.S. consumes from. More than half of what we consume in the U.S. is produced in Canada. So then they were saying, wait a minute, 50%, that's way too much. Well, guess what? Sure, you put a delay on that till April whatever. But now you're saying, you know what, we're just going to do 50%. Now you've just actually created the same problem that you had before. And that's even before we get to the fact that, oh my gosh, these Canada-Mexico tariffs are supposed to come into place in April, and then that would stack on top of that. We haven't even gotten to steel. Steel's the actual tonnage. That's a much bigger market.
Let's talk a little bit about steel. And Rich, I'm curious to get your perspective here because you see the reaction in the stocks of U.S. Steel, for example, Nucor, some of the equities that fall under your coverage. What does this mean for those companies, and what was their position heading into this period?
Well, what it means is that obviously the price of steel has greatly increased, and it should increase a little bit more. But it's also what's going to do is start to attract imports also, because people are going to say, well, even if the price of Canada's steel is up 50%. But the price of the rest of the world is only up 25%, so I can afford to take a 25% tariff on their price and bring it in. So if you look at the U.S. imports about 20% of their needs a year. We've looked at probably a third of that is actually steel that the U.S. producers don't want to make or can't make. So that still has to be imported, and the other one is opportunities for these other companies to step in and fill the void with those, make those grades of steel that they had in the past.
You know, to that end, we've seen U.S. Steel take a little bit of a jump on today's news, but it had been tumbling into today. It's still up on the year. Growth concerns on one side, then the tariff pressure on the other. How do you net out those concerns, Joe?
I mean, demand's the bottom line. If nobody has confidence in the economy, because that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about GDP. If nobody has confidence in the economy because tariffs are coming on the whim, why would you buy steel? So yeah, maybe you get a short-term bump in price if you're the mill. But looking out, inventories are the highest we've seen in years. Consumers are the bottom line here. And if they're not buying steel, it doesn't matter that you're saying, well, guess what? There's no foreign imports coming. Because they're not buying the domestic stuff either. So I think that's really what we're going to have to watch today. There's a lot of concern in the market, I'm sure.
And it's worth pointing out, I mean, we're coming off a year where U.S. steel was down 30%. I know it had some idiosyncratic issues, but it's been a pretty ugly picture.
Well, but even away from the stock price of U.S. Steel and Nucor, it seems like, or I'm sure he would tell you, what President Trump wants to do is bring production jobs back to the U.S., especially steel jobs. So are you saying you don't think that Nucor and U.S. Steel are going to be ramping up their production of aluminum and hiring a ton of people? Like, is Allentown going to be
Well, they're not going to be
bustling?
hiring a ton of people. They could ramp up production. Right. But the great thing about these EAFs is they don't require a lot of people to operate. And that was never the point in the first place. Donald Trump made clear in 2018 that it was about capacity utilization to improve the profits of the steelmakers. It wasn't about hiring more people.
All right.
If you look at utilization, the industry last week was at 75%. So it does have spare capacity to ramp up. Aluminum's a different story. The U.S., our electricity costs aren't competitive, so we're not going to be able to add production of aluminum in the short term. And no producer is going to do it unless they can get a 20 or 30-year power contract that locks in the price of the power.
But steel, will they add jobs in steel production?
Well, I don't know if they'll add jobs, but I think they'll take that 75% utilization and ramp it back up to the mid-80s.